It's a trap. My name is Tim Rose, and I played Admiral Ackbar, Salacious Crumb, and Sy Snootles in Star Wars. I hope you enjoy this interview.
So Tim, before we get to talking about Star Wars, I want to know a bit about how you became involved in the puppetry industry. So when was the moment you knew that's what you wanted to go into as a career? And were there any puppeteers who inspired you?
Oh, most definitely. The main one, of course, was Jim Henson, because when I was still going to school, at least university, the Muppet Show was already being shown on TV in America. So unlike other people who watched it from the couch, I watched it from a foot away from the screen, trying to work out how all the puppets were being operated. And the other big influence on me, I didn't actually know that I wanted to do puppetry until I was at university. And we were doing a thing called Toward Tomorrow fairs. They were Renaissance fairs. And I kept researching old medieval fairs. And I came up reading a lot about the Bartholomew fairs, which were held on the frozen Thames. I don't think we could do that anymore for some reason.
No, I don't think so.
But we won't go into a whole side avenue of global warming here. Yeah, they were held on the frozen Thames. And I kept coming up with Punch and Judy shows being mentioned. So I thought, well, for this Renaissance fair, I'll do a Punch and Judy show, knowing absolutely nothing about making puppets or how to do a Punch and Judy show. But I knew a couple who had always come to our school. They were a, what you would call a mom and pop marionette company. And they used to perform at the local elementary schools. And I knew where they lived. So I went and knocked on the door and said, hi, I know you don't know me, but my name is Tim Rose, and I was wondering if you could teach me how to make a puppet, expecting for the door to be slammed in my face and me to walk back to my car. But instead, they brought me in. They took me downstairs to their cellar, which was where their workshops were. And on the walls of the cellar were marionettes in clear plastic bags going all the way back to the early 1930s, because they had originally been a vaudeville act. And I just looked around this Aladdin's cave of puppets, and I said, you can make all these beautiful things and have this much fun and earn a living to afford this house you're living in as well. Could you teach me how to make a puppet? So they did.
Wow.
So that was pretty much the beginning.
Right. So how did you go on to work on Star Wars Return of the Jedi?
I actually wanted, at the time, I wanted to be working on, it was the Muppet TV show that the Doozers were in. I can't think of the name of the show now. I really wanted to be working on it, though. It'll come to me. Anyway, when I asked Jim if I could be a puppeteer on it, and I wanted to puppeteer on it because A, it was being shot in Canada, and B, because puppeteers get paid a lot more than technicians do. So I wanted to make more money.
Fair enough.
And Jim said that my value to the company was the animatronic work that I was creating. And at the time, being a young man, I thought that he was telling me that I just wasn't a good enough puppeteer. It's only with age and hindsight I realized that it wasn't that hard to find a puppeteer, but to find someone who knew how to design this new system, animatronics, we were very few and far between. Even to this day, in the UK, I would say there are 38 to 40 of us, and only half of those are worth hiring. But don't tell them I said that. It's not easy to do. You know, it's not. There's no school you go to. You either can do it or you can't.
Yeah.
So when he told me I couldn't be a puppeteer on that, I got angry and I left and I went back to New York, where I had an apartment before I was brought to England. I was sitting there out of work in New York City going, Tim, you stupid idiot, what have you done? All you want to do is puppets. You were working for the biggest puppet company in the world, and you quit. You must be out of your mind. And while I was sitting there beating myself up, the telephone rang, and a man, Mike McCormick, who I'd worked on Dark Crystal with and on Great Muppet Caper and on a couple other Muppet projects, called me up and he said, Tim, I've been out here in California working with Phil Tippet, and he was rehearsing. He'd made a version of Sy Snootles, nightclub singer in Jabba's palace, but he'd made her as a classic marionette. So he was up on a scaffold trying to operate her, and he lost his balance, fell off the scaffold, and he broke his arm. So he said, I can't do the movie. If you can get out here to California, maybe you can take my place in the workshop. So I flew out there, did an interview, and they decided they wanted to hire me. So I was now working in the workshop, but Mike had also already been, it had been agreed that he was going to operate Salacious Crumb on the movie and Sy Snootles. So since I'd taken his place, then that was my audition for those two characters.
Right, right.
And there were loads of other aliens there that we were building and working with. And there was this one I quite liked, these big red guy that was over there in the corner, and I made him a set of eyes, and I built a whole set of things for the cable controls for his mouth movements and all that sort of thing. And I said, Phil, who is that guy anyway? He said, oh, he's a background character that appears later in the film. So I said, well, does he appear in any of the scenes as Salacious Crumb and Sy Snootles? And he said, no, he never goes to Jabba's palace. I said, well, can I operate him as well then? He said, yeah, okay, you can do that. So that was my audition to do Admiral Ackbar. As easy as that. There wasn't any auditioning against thousands of people. You know, I just asked Phil, he said yes, and I got the job. So.
Wow, you must be glad you asked.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained is the expression.
Exactly.
If you don't ask, you don't get. Like people wanting interviews, isn't that the case? Yeah. Oh no, I will.
Oh. So tell me, how did the three characters you play compare in the way they operated? How were they all controlled?
As I said, the Sy Snootles, Mike had broke his arm falling off the scaffold, so I decided I wasn't going to fall off the scaffold. So I invented what I called a reverse string marionette. Now, marionettes are all hanging from strings and gravity holds them down on the ground. What I did was I suspended Sy Snootles on bungee cord from the ceiling of the studio. And if I let go of her, she would actually float up into the air. And then I had cables so I could pull her down on the ground and make her body and hips move around. And I had on two catcher pads on my legs with rods going up into her feet so that anything I did, any dance that I did, she would copy with her feet. So it was a reverse string marionette. Why it worked so well was because marionettes always look very floaty because they're floating. But Sy could stamp her feet. You know, when she was dancing, she could actually really get into it. She had mass and weight. I always wanted to play more with the idea and develop it further, but didn't get much chance to do it. Salacious Crumb was a hand puppet, just like Kermit. And he was so much like Kermit that if you took his skin off, he had Kermit's skeleton inside of him.
No way.
The same construction method, the same way that we would build Kermit the Frog was exactly how he was made. And Mike had made him because he'd left Muppets under a bit of a cloud. He'd gotten upset with Jim as well. Salacious Crumb, the story behind his look and construction was, what would Kermit the Frog look like if he'd taken too many steroids?
That's brilliant.
And that's how they created the look for for Salacious Crumb from Kermit the Frog. Now, Admiral Ackbar he had two different versions. There was a full bodysuit version for establishing shots when you needed to see the whole character. And he had a cable controlled mouth, which my friend Mike, I would do the dialogue and all the physical actions. And then Mike would hear the dialogue I was doing, and he would mouth sync the mouth with the cable controls and the lips. But most of the stuff you see with Ackbar on screen, I built a second version of him, which was a hand puppet. I was able to put my hand into the head, and I operated the mouth Muppet style, same as Kermit. And he had blinky eyes and arms moved and all that. So for close-up shots, we had more movement in the puppet. So the puppet would be used for close-ups. The full bodysuit would be used for establishing shots. So as you see, all three of them were entirely different from each other.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, what was it like being inside the Admiral Ackbar costume?
It was horrendous.
Oh.
I got in big trouble. I was doing a convention in Australia. We'd filmed Force Awakens, but it hadn't come out yet. So I knew that when I got up to do my talk that day, everybody was going to say, tell us about Force Awakens, which of course I'm not allowed to do because I've signed a non-disclosure agreement. So I thought, and I said, what will I talk about today? I'll tell them what it's like being inside a full bodysuit costume. So I started thinking about it and realized that the rigors, the things that we put up with voluntarily doing the job were not dissimilar to the torture techniques of Guantanamo Bay.
Oh my gosh.
Now, one of the things they liked to do there was waterboarding, where they put a wet towel over your face, pour water over it so you can't get any oxygen through the mask. Well, when you're in a full bodysuit, if there's any air at all, it usually is coming through the back of the mouth. We try to put a scrim in the back so some air can come in. But your body goes up to about 102. I don't know the Celsius. I really need to work out the Celsius on this one. It's 101, 102 degrees. So that's 36, 38. You're into, I've got a fever territory the whole time you're inside the suit. So your entire body's covered in sweat, and that sweat has to go someplace. So it tries to go out through the same hole you're trying to breathe in through, and it covers the scrim, so you can't get air in the suit anymore. And with Ackbar, I could see out of his right nostril. So when they wanted him to go any place, we called it laying the breadcrumbs. We'd get little bits of gaffer tape. They would lead me where they wanted me to go, and I would tell them what I could see out my nose, and they would put a little mark of tape all around so that I knew I was lined up properly. You know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm looking over there at the floor, but my head is now looking at the person I'm meant to be talking to. You know, it was that. You just worked out what looked right, and then you worked out a way to repeat that movement.
So do you have any memories with the A-listers, maybe Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, that you can share with us, please?
Nope. If you go to my website, admiralackbar.co.uk, I have the most famous story about how Salacious Crumb was fired by Harrison Ford off set.
Oh.
But that's a very long story. So if you want to read that story, I've told it so many times now.
Yeah.
I did interact. Carrie and I, Return of the Jedi, when she was chained up to Jabba, she didn't like talking to me, but she liked talking to Salacious.
Oh.
So she and Salacious had a really fun friendship together. They talked quite a bit together. And Mark Hamill, Mark actually, he had always wanted to be a stop-action animator like Ray Harryhausen. The acting was sort of by accident while he was trying to be a stop-action animator. So he would always come around to see what the animatronics were that were being done. You know, he had a real focus and an interest in that. Yeah, I mean, I've talked to just about everybody on and off. I really liked in The Force Awakens, it was Billy, who was Carrie Fisher's daughter. She was actually right next to me where I was on set while we were filming for most of the day. So I talked to Billy a lot more than I talked to Carrie. Because when you're in a suit, you can only, you know, you're lucky if the person right next to you can hear what you're saying in front of them. You know?
Yeah.
So she was telling me that when we were filming, she was 18 years old, and she was the same age that her mother was when she had done the very first Star Wars movie.
Oh, right.
So she really liked that. She was really nice. I'm sure we'll be seeing lots more of her because she was a lovely person. So.
Let's go back to Return of the Jedi for a moment. Did you see much of George Lucas, and what was he like?
Well, Richard Marquand was our director on Return of the Jedi. I saw George much more when we were working in the workshop, because he would come along. I mean, film work is not a job like most people expect jobs. You know, if you want to come to work at 9 in the morning and leave at 5 in the afternoon, forget film work. You won't like it, because we would still be there working at 9 o'clock at night, even though we got there at 8 o'clock in the morning.
That's dedication.
And George would have finished all of his meetings, and he would come in and spend time with us and see what we were creating and, you know, what we'd come up with next. He was the one who named Salacious Crumb. I was there when we were just playing with the puppet, and he said, Salacious Crumb. And I asked him, I said, yes, I'm going to be puppeteering it. What would you like me to do with him? And he just said, well, I want you to puppeteer. That's what you do, isn't it?
That's useful.
And I said, I was hoping he'd give me a little hint on character or anything like that. So he named Salacious. So I looked Salacious up in the dictionary, and it sort of said, someone who gets enjoyment from the misfortunes of others. So I thought, okay, Salacious by name, Salacious by nature. So that's when I made him into the cheerleader for the Rancor pit monster.
Yeah.
And every time somebody got fed to him, he'd be right there leaning over the pit and laughing away, listening to their bones crunching, you know. So.
Is there a story behind how his laugh came about?
It just seemed right when the bones were crunching, that's all. I think of myself as being quite a nice guy, but when you do puppets, sometimes they can release a part of you didn't know existed. And I've actually got quite a mean streak in me as well.
Oh, okay.
Someone who can laugh that much while somebody else is being killed is not a very nice person.
Nah, definitely not.
But of course, it's all pretend. So
yeah. So you reprised your role as Ackbar in 2015 for The Force Awakens. So how did you feel about returning, and how did that all come about?
Once again, I was in Australia doing yet another convention, and my friend Brian Herring, who you probably know better as BB-8, he did the character BB-8. He was also in charge of collecting all the puppeteers for the movie, and he felt that I should be Ackbar. And what was funny was that at the convention, all the fans were saying, oh, they're making another movie. Is Ackbar in it? And I go, oh, I don't know. Funny enough, they don't contact me first before they start doing these things. You know? And then I said, and if they were going to have Ackbar in the movie, they're going to have somebody in the suit who was my age when I was doing Ackbar, which was about 24 years old, because of how physical it is. And then Brian contacted me. he said that he'd really pushed because he thought that I should be Ackbar again. So I was very flattered by that. I said, well, of course I'll be Ackbar again. But the first thing I did after saying yes, I'd do it was to go up to my workshop, pump up the tires of my bicycle and start doing serious mileage. Because if I was going to do Ackbar again, I didn't want to die while doing the part.
No, that wouldn't be so good.
Because it is incredibly physically demanding. And it's a lot easier to do when you're 24 than when you're 58. So
yeah, I bet. So Ackbar's death is very controversial among fans. As someone who knows the character so well, what's your take on that? Are you happy with, how his sort of story ended, or would you have liked to see something else happen to him?
How did you feel about Admiral Ackbar's death scene?
Well, honestly, I think he could have had something a bit more honorable or dramatic, because as a character from the original trilogy, I think he might have deserved more personally, because he was kind of just sucked out of a ship really quickly.
You don't even see him sucked out. He was there behind Carrie and then he wasn't.
Yeah.
We did shoot Ackbar's death scene. We did all the dialogue. They brought in the stuntmen who were being paid £6,000 each per shot. So £6,000 each time we did a take. And in the days of CGI, they did the explosions as practical effects. So the shot was so dangerous that everybody was made to leave the set, and they set up monitors for us outside in the alleyway so that we could watch what was happening inside, but we weren't allowed to be in there. And they hooked snatch lines onto the 3 calamari. And then when the explosion went off, when they blew the hole through the spaceship, the force of the explosion first blew them all forward. So they flew over to where Carrie had been standing by the main console. But then, of course, the vacuum took over from the explosion and they were sucked out. So the snatch lines they were attached to basically pulled them from the stage floor to 60 or 70 feet in the air in about a second. I don't know the actual.
Wow.
60 feet so fast that you didn't want to eat lunch beforehand or you'd be throwing it up inside your costume. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the whole flame and fire, and they went forward through the flame and fire and then out through the ceiling. And it was never seen. My personal opinion was that when they watched what they had done to Ackbar, I would like to think they were so horrified that they did not want to show that to the kids. It was too graphic and too real,
Yeah.
I mean, when we came in, they were still hanging on the ceiling when we were allowed back in. So they were lowered down from the ceiling. And when the stuntmen got on the floor, the dressers ran over to get them out of the costumes, but they couldn't because the costumes were too hot to touch. So these 3 people were inside 3 costumes that were too hot to touch. So that's why stuntmen get £6,000 per take.
It all makes sense now. That's really, really interesting insight there, and so cool to hear. Thank you, Tim. It's such a shame it wasn't included, though. It would have been awesome to see. But obviously, puppetry, we're seeing less and less of it in films now. But what are your general feelings towards the uprise and the use of CGI?
What, the fact that it's put me out of a really nice career just when I was having fun? I don't have a lot of time for CGI. Although it's helped to visualize things, it's also killed a lot of other things in the meantime. When you act with an animatronic character, the character is there on the set. So if an actor does something that stimulates the action, you can see it as the animatronic character and respond to them, and both of you kind of go off script and ad lib and create something better than what was being done in the first place. What you now see over and over again, because the CGI is so expensive and takes so long to do, is most of it's being drawn before the live action's even been shot. So the actors still come up with things that they'd like to do, but now they're being told you can't do that because the character you're talking to has already been drawn. So you have to act exactly like that. So instead of acting, you're basically just filling in the blanks. It's not the same as acting at all. So what they've done is CGI films are what I described, they're just roller coaster rides where they blind you with so much visual effects, so much hocus pocus going on, that you get from one end of it to the other and feel like you've been on a roller coaster and don't even realize you didn't actually get much drama or much storyline or much anything else in there at all. You know, it's killed off. It's killed drama.
Well, hopefully in the future we'll see CGI used more, in moderation, and we'll also see more puppets being used. But what advice would you give somebody wanting to, go into that puppetry industry? Let's say somebody watching wants to be a puppeteer. What would you say to them?
Yeah, go someplace else. Well, the joke has always been with puppets that they were the second oldest profession. And personally, I think that they were the oldest profession. But everybody's always prophesying the end of puppets. Now, of course, CGI has done a pretty good job of eliminating puppets out of movies. They only get jobs now if the production doesn't have enough money to pay for CGI, as opposed to in the 80s and 90s when we were the effects of the movies. And puppets will always be around. I think they're the best when they're interacting with people. The one thing that CGI can't do, well, they joke I do a lot of conventions and they say CGI can't sign. There's nothing there. You see it in the movie, but there's nobody that you can meet at the convention who was behind it because it's not really there, And puppets are really there. So I think their future is more in live entertainment and interaction. I started my career doing performing in shopping malls and fairgrounds and the summer fairs and things, and had a lot of fun with that. I actually earned money with people throwing money in my hat. I earned more money than what I was being paid by Muppets when I went to work for Muppets. But I wanted to learn more about puppets. I was never about earning money. I was always about wanting to create things. So I think that the future of puppets is in live entertainment, which is the one area CGI can't go.
So there you have it. Thank you so much, Tim, for your time. It's been a real pleasure hearing your stories. You're such an interesting guy, and it was great getting some insight into Star Wars there. Before we go, do you have anything you'd like to promote, whether it's a website, social media, anywhere where the fans can find you?
Well, I did mention it once already, but I'll mention it again. That was www.Admiral Ackbar, all one word, .co.uk. And on there, what I really like, it's supposed to say My Star Wars Collection, but the guy who did the website messed up. So it just says collection in the banner. But what My Star Wars Collection is I've been doing conventions for so many years now that people always want to give me things. Now, if I tried to display everything that everybody gave me, I'd have no room to sit down in the house. So what I did was I took a photograph of everything and I put it in my Star Wars collection on my website. So if anybody wants to see what I've been given, apart from my 501st badge collection that you can see behind me, and Jeremy Bullock's, there we go.
There we go.
Jeremy Bullock's signed picture doing his Norman Rockwell imitation. And you can go there and see it.
That's perfect. Thank you once again, Tim, and best wishes for the future.
Okay then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.